I guess it always starts with something small, something you'd never notice if you weren't looking for it. Which, of course, I wasn't. Why would I be? Jenna and I had been married for over 11 years, and while the flame didn't exactly burn like it did back in our honeymoon days, I thought we had built something solid, predictable maybe, but stable. It began last fall, right around the time our second car broke down. I offered to carpool or rent something until we figured out a replacement, but she brushed me off with that smug, dismissive tone she'd developed lately. "Don't worry about it," she said, pouring her overpriced almond milk into her coffee. "I'll just use a rideshare, probably cheaper than gas with prices like these." I didn't love the idea, but I let it slide. I had a job to focus on, deadlines breathing down my neck, and the last thing I expected was that my wife's sudden appreciation for local transportation would be the first sign she was riding straight out of our marriage, just not in the way I thought. At first, it was just small talk. She'd mention Cal here and there. "Cal was early today," or "Cal knows the best shortcuts around traffic." Then it became "Cal always helps carry the bags in," or "Cal says the sushi place near 4th has the freshest yellowtail." Each time she said his name, it was like I'd stepped into some alternate version of our life, one where another man had a front row seat to her routines, her laughter, even her complaints about me. While I stood on the sidelines like a clueless extra in a play I didn't even know was happening. I remember one Sunday morning she laughed at a text she received while we were in bed, turned the phone away a little too quickly, then said, "It's just Cal, relax." Like I was some uptight control freak for raising an eyebrow at my wife texting her taxi driver at 8:47 a.m. But here's where it got weird, and by weird, I mean the kind of weird that scratches the back of your brain when you're trying to fall asleep, a silent alarm that goes off not in words, but in gut feelings you can't quite explain. She started dressing up more often, even for errands that supposedly involved nothing more than picking up a rotisserie chicken or grabbing a quick facial. There was perfume where there didn't used to be, makeup done just a little too perfectly for a 30-minute grocery run, and the way she'd toss her hair while checking her reflection before heading out made me feel like she wasn't going shopping at all, but auditioning for something or someone. I asked her once, half joking, if she was seeing someone, and she rolled her eyes so hard I thought they'd get stuck. "Don't be ridiculous," she scoffed, with that condescending smirk she always wore when she thought she'd won. "He's just convenient. Calm down." And like an idiot, I did. I calmed down. I stayed quiet. But deep down, something had already cracked open. Something I wouldn't be able to ignore for much longer. It didn't happen overnight, which in a way made it worse, because when love dies slowly, you don't notice the funeral until the casket's already 6 feet underground. One day, she was laughing at my jokes over morning coffee, and the next I couldn't even get a grunt of acknowledgement from across the table. The warmth in her eyes disappeared like morning fog under a rising sun. And what replaced it wasn't anger or sadness or even contempt, it was nothing, and I swear to God, that emptiness hurt more than any shouting match ever could. Conversations became transactional, robotic, a string of clipped one-word replies from someone who once used to tell me everything, her dreams, her fears, even the color she'd paint the bedroom if money weren't a factor. Now all I got was fine, whatever, or the ever-daggering do what you want. The light in her was dimming. Or maybe it had just been moved, pointed somewhere else entirely, and I was the fool still standing in the dark. Dinners turned into silent rituals where the only thing sizzling was the food, and even that felt forced, microwaved leftovers served with a side of cold shoulder. She stopped sitting across from me and started choosing the bar stool at the kitchen island, always facing away, as if the back of her head made a better dinner companion than the man who built a life with her. Intimacy? That word might as well have been erased from our dictionary. I remember reaching out one night, not even for sex, just to hold her, and she flinched like my touch was a live wire. "I'm tired," she mumbled, rolling away, clutching the edge of the bed like it might save her from drowning in me. The rejection wasn't loud, but it echoed in the silence between us, bouncing off the walls of a house that used to feel like home but now felt more like a museum, full of things that looked familiar but no longer held any meaning. When I finally mustered up the courage to ask her what was going on, if she was okay, if we were okay, she snapped like a twig under pressure. "I'm just tired of you constantly hovering. You're suffocating me," she shouted, venom laced in every word. I stood there stunned, as if I'd just stepped into a conversation already in progress, one I didn't even know I'd been having. I wasn't hovering. I was trying. I was hanging on to the last thread of connection like a man dangling off the edge of a cliff. But she wasn't reaching back. She wasn't even looking. Something was shifting between us, and deep down, I think I knew exactly what it was, even if I wasn't ready to say it out loud. But the storm was coming, and some part of me had already started to brace for the impact. At first, I gave her the benefit of the doubt, not just because I trusted her, but because that's the kind of man I've always tried to be. I wasn't raised to assume the worst, especially not about the woman I vowed to share my life with. So when Jenna started coming home later than usual, her hair tousled in that way that looked more careless than styled, her makeup still fresh even at 9 at night, I convinced myself it was just one of those phases. Maybe work was running long. Maybe she was reconnecting with friends. Maybe she was finally taking the time for herself I'd been encouraging her to take for years. I wanted to believe her stories: traffic jams, last-minute errands, spot treatments that ran behind schedule. I smiled through all of it, told her to rest, offered to warm up her dinner, even made tea while she kicked off her shoes and muttered half-hearted apologies. I showed up every night with patience, kindness, and trust, and she met it all with vague answers and that now familiar distance in her eyes. Still, I didn't push her. I asked gentle questions instead, about her day, her friends, how she was feeling, and when she brushed me off with, "I'm just tired," I let it go, again and again. I handled the chores. I made sure everything in the house ran smoothly. I gave her space when she seemed irritable and support when she claimed stress. But over time, even the smallest things started to not make sense. I'd hear her come in, laughing quietly on the phone, only to suddenly go silent when she saw me. There were times she said she went to see Melissa or another friend, but when I bumped into those friends around town, they always seemed confused, like they hadn't seen her in weeks. Her explanations were full of holes, and no matter how tightly I tried to sew them together in my head, they unraveled the moment I stopped trying so hard. Eventually, one quiet evening, I asked her, not accusingly, not angrily, just honestly. I looked her in the eyes, soft-spoken, calm, and said, "Is there someone else, Jenna? If something's wrong, I'd rather know than pretend we're okay." And that's when she snapped, not in sadness or guilt, but in pure, defensive hysteria. Her voice rose like a siren, face twisted in rage, accusing me of being paranoid, insecure, controlling. She said I was crazy for even asking the question. "You've lost your damn mind," she screamed, pacing the kitchen like I'd just betrayed her. But I didn't yell back. I didn't storm out. I just stood there, silently, heartbreaking in slow motion, wondering how I became the villain in a story where I'd only ever tried to be her anchor. And even then, in the middle of all her noise, I still held out hope, some stupid, naive part of me hoping that this wasn't what it looked like. That maybe, just maybe, she'd calm down and tell me the truth. But all I got was venom. It was one of those quiet moments that shouldn't have meant anything: a Tuesday afternoon, overcast sky, and I was home early because the job site had shut down due to weather. She wasn't home yet, and I figured I'd surprise her by picking up the living room, maybe make coffee the way she liked it. That was me still trying, still believing. But when I moved her purse off the counter to clear space, a folded receipt slipped out and landed on the tile. I picked it up without thinking, figuring it was from the grocery store or gas station, but when I unfolded it, the name Hilton Garden and stared me in the face like a slap. It felt like my lungs forgot how to breathe. I just stood there, holding that thin slip of paper like it weighed 50 pounds, like it might set fire to my fingers if I held it too long. But I didn't confront her, not right away. Not because I was scared, but because I needed something more. Something undeniable. That receipt was confirmation, but it wasn't proof. And if I'd learned anything over the last few months, it was that confronting her with half the truth only gave her more room to lie. So I slid the receipt back into her purse exactly where I found it, careful not to leave any creases or fingerprints that didn't already belong. I poured myself a cup of coffee I didn't want and sat at the table, staring out the window, forcing my hands to stop shaking. And when she came home an hour later, hair freshly styled, smelling like a perfume she used to wear on date nights, I didn't say a word. I greeted her like I always did, asked how her day was, and watched her lie to my face with a smile that barely reached her eyes. But what hit me hardest wasn't the lie, it was how easy it came to her now. Like deception had become a second language she spoke better than the truth. That night, I made a decision. I would get proof. Real proof. Not for her. She didn't deserve the courtesy, but for me. For my sanity. For the man I still believed I was, standing in the ruins of a marriage I didn't destroy. The days that followed were a slow-motion free-fall. Jenna barely looked at me, and when she did, it was with that thin veil of contempt she didn't even try to hide anymore. Every conversation was a battle, every dinner a silent war of who would speak first, and when she did finally let the words fly, they cut deeper than I ever expected. You know, maybe if you made more money, I wouldn't be the only one carrying this marriage, she snapped one night while tossing her coat across the back of the chair, not even glancing in my direction. You've been stuck in the same job for how many years now? And for what? So we can scrape by while you pretend like effort counts for anything in the real world. I didn't answer, not because I didn't have something to say, but because I knew exactly what this was. She wanted a fight. She wanted me to blow up so she could make me the bad guy in whatever story she was already telling herself. Or worse, telling someone else. But I didn't give her the satisfaction. I just cleaned up the plates, wiped down the counter, and nodded like a man who already knew the end of the movie, because I did. I just hadn't watched the final scene yet. There's a certain kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix, the kind that settles in your bones when the person you trusted most turns into someone you can't even recognize, and every quiet moment becomes a minefield of overthinking, self-doubt, and unanswered questions. That's where I was, sitting at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and a hotel receipt still burned into the front of my mind, when I realized something painfully simple. I wasn't going to get the truth from Jenna. Because the truth was the one thing she'd already decided I didn't deserve. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want drama. I just wanted clarity. I wanted something real to hold on to in the middle of a marriage that had become smoke and mirrors. So I swallowed my pride, grabbed a referral from an old buddy, and made a call I never thought I'd make in my life. That's how I met Mark. Mark wasn't what I expected. He wasn't some sleazy trench coat cliché from the movies. He was quiet, composed, and sharp as hell. The kind of man who doesn't ask unnecessary questions because he already knows exactly what to look for. We met in a quiet cafe out of town, where he sipped his black coffee like he had all the time in the world while I sat across from him, hands shaking, heart pounding, laying out the pieces of my crumbling life like broken glass on a table. I told him everything, what I'd seen, what I'd felt, and what I couldn't prove, and he nodded without flinching. You're not crazy, he said, his voice calm, even. You're just being lied to. But don't worry, we'll get you the truth. He explained the plan in clear, efficient detail, a discreet GPS tracker on her phone, another on her car, and a surveillance setup to tail her movements. Give me 72 hours, he said as he stood to leave. If something's there, we'll catch it. The next 3 days felt like I was living in slow motion, every minute stretching longer than the last, every second echoing with a voice in my head that whispered, what if you're wrong? But what if you're right? I still kissed her goodbye when she left in the mornings, still made her coffee, still acted like the man she thought she had fooled, but behind my smile was a clock ticking down to the moment everything would change. Every ding of my phone made my stomach lurch. Every late arrival, every vague excuse, every smirk on her face felt like one more nail in the coffin of the life I thought we were building together. I didn't know what Mark would find, but I knew one thing for sure. If the truth was out there, I was finally ready to face it, no matter how much it hurt. It was exactly 9:41 p.m. when my phone lit up with Mark's name, and those 4 words that made my heart stop in my chest like a bad engine throwing a piston. We have movement. Come over. I don't even remember grabbing my keys. I just remember driving with both hands clenched so tight around the wheel that the skin turned white and my knuckles ached. The night air felt like lead, and as I pulled into the lot near the strip of abandoned buildings where Mark had set up his vantage point, my chest burned like it was full of acid. He didn't say anything when I got out, just gave me a look that said brace yourself, and pointed to a spot overlooking the old warehouse parking lot across the street. That's when I saw it. Cal's car, parked under the single working floodlight, engine still running, windows fogging ever so slightly. Then, like clockwork, she appeared, Jenna, wearing the same blouse I'd complimented just 2 days ago when she told me she bought it for a client meeting. I watched her smile and practically glide into the back seat like she was stepping into a dream she didn't want to wake up from. I wanted to believe maybe she was just getting dropped off. Maybe this was all some cruel misunderstanding. But then 10 minutes passed, and the car started rocking, first gently, then with a rhythm that made me feel physically sick. Mark, calm as ever, zoomed in with his camera, catching the silhouettes and movement with painful precision. I felt like someone had hooked a car battery to my chest and flipped the switch. Rage, white-hot and primal, surged through me in a way I didn't know I was capable of feeling. My entire body screamed at me to run across the lot, rip that door open, and end it right there, consequences be damned. I wanted to drag Cal out by his smug face and make her see what she'd done, make them both feel the weight of the world they'd just shattered without a second thought. I wasn't thinking straight. I wasn't even thinking like myself, but before I could move, Mark stepped in front of me, firm hand to my chest, voice like ice water poured over fire. Don't do it. Don't let her turn you into the bad guy. You want justice, not jail. I stood there trembling, my fists clenched, heart pounding like a war drum in my ears while the woman I loved betrayed me 20 feet away as if I never existed. Mark didn't flinch. He just handed me a flash drive with the footage and calmly said, "This is your proof. You don't need to swing at anybody. You need a good lawyer, and I've got the best in town. We'll bury her in paperwork before she even realizes what's happening." And that was the moment everything shifted. That rage? I didn't bury it. I just redirected it. I nodded, slid the flash drive into my coat pocket like it was a loaded weapon, and walked back to my truck with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in months. Jenna wanted a secret life? She could keep it. But I was about to turn the rest of her life into a courtroom reality show she'd never recover from, and this time, I wasn't just reacting. I was taking control. I didn't drive straight home after Mark gave me the flash drive. I drove in circles for over an hour, headlights cutting through the empty streets like searchlights in a city that suddenly felt like a stranger to me. When I finally pulled into my driveway sometime past midnight, I didn't even turn on the lights. I walked into the house like a ghost, poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey, then another, and sank into the couch with the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest like a truck. I watched the shadows stretch across the ceiling and let the poison numb the edges of my thoughts until my eyelids finally shut. I don't know how long I slept, but the first thing I saw when I woke up wasn't a new day, it was her. Jenna, peacefully curled up in our bed, wrapped in the same sheets I once tucked her into with kisses, her breathing calm, her expression so serene it made my skin crawl. Like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just thrown away our entire marriage in the backseat of a taxi like it was some cheap fantasy she could wipe clean by morning. That was the moment I stopped being heartbroken and started being done. I didn't confront her. I didn't slam doors or scream accusations. I moved silently, deliberately, like a man on a mission. I packed a bag with the essentials, my passport, important documents, the flash drive Mark gave me, and a change of clothes. I left my wedding ring on the nightstand, not out of drama, but because it didn't belong to me anymore. I didn't mean the last part, but I needed her to believe everything was normal, at least for one more day. I called my boss on the way and requested emergency leave, told him I had personal matters to handle. He didn't ask questions. By 8:15 a.m., I was sitting across from Mark's attorney, a man who looked like he enjoyed tearing people apart in court more than he liked his morning coffee. I gave him the flash drive and every detail, sparing nothing, and waited in silence while he reviewed it all, expression unreadable. When he finally looked up, he said the words I didn't expect but desperately needed. In this state, adultery voids spousal claim. She cheated. She gets nothing, not the house, not your pension, not a dime. We'll take everything. It didn't feel like victory. Not yet. It felt like the start of something grim, something necessary. I didn't want revenge just for the sake of pain. I wanted closure. I wanted fairness. I wanted to walk away knowing I had done everything right while she made every wrong turn. This wasn't about getting even. It was about making sure I never again allowed myself to be the last to know, the one left bleeding in the wreckage while the other person walked away untouched. The plan was in motion now. Quiet. Legal. Devastating. And when it was all over, she'd finally realized that the man she discarded was the same man who held the power to end her world without raising his voice. That was my promise to myself, and this time, I wasn't breaking it. There is a moment in every person's life when silence speaks louder than any cry, where justice comes not with fists or rage, but with a pen, a calm voice and truth, naked on the table. I returned to the house not as a man, not as a broken man, but as someone finally free from denial. Mark's lawyer, dressed in such a sharp suit that he could cut glass, walked next to me with the quiet confidence of someone who had dismantled hundreds of liars in courtrooms across the state. Jenna was in the kitchen pretending to stir a pot of something she never finished, probably waiting for another client meeting or lie she hadn't yet rehearsed. She didn't even look up until I put the envelope on the table. "What is it?" she asked. "This," the lawyer said, "is your message. You are served." For a second, her face did not move. Then, like a switch, she exploded. "You think you can leave me?" she screamed, slamming her hand against the counter so hard the spoon flew out of the pot. "You think you can part with me and keep everything? I'll take the house, the car, your retirement, every damn cent you have." She was practically foam, a voice cracking as she walked in a circle, a tornado of narcissistic hysteria. And through it all, I just stood there, arms crossed, silent, watching her burn the last of her manias. The lawyer smiled, slowly and coldly, as he heard this exact speech 100 times from women like her. "Feel free to try," he said, tapping calmly on the evidence folder at hand. "Just know that in this state adultery has consequences. And we have everything. Shots, testimony, even timestamps. So go ahead, Jenna. Threaten whatever you want. But this courtroom doesn't work on tantrums, it works on facts." She then fell silent, not because she believed us, but because for the first time someone said no to her, and meant. I didn't stay long after that. I had no reason to. My lawyer would handle the bloodshed, and I had no interest in watching her implode any further than she already had. I had a bag already packed, and by that evening, I was 2 hours outside the city in a quiet cabin I'd found by the lake. No cell service, no lies, just a fishing rod, a fire pit, and the stillness of nature that felt like therapy for a soul that had been fighting a silent war for months. I didn't cry. I didn't stew in anger. I just sat on the dock every morning with the rising mist, casting line after line, letting the water take the weight from my chest. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't surviving, I was healing. And while she screamed threats into a courtroom she'd never win, I was already halfway to peace.